A fat daughter
If we
was
don't
given
leave
to a
now,
Mafia
everything
boss
we've
as
built will be
punishment by her
destroyed.
father. But
There is no turning back from
the
this.
wind carried whispers of secrets, of deals made in shadowed corners, and of curses long forgotten. Among the palaces of power and crime, one mansion stood apart, dark, grand, and unwelcoming, yet alive with a quiet menace. It was the home of Lucien Valcourt, the Mafia boss whose name alone could silence a room. Rumors said he was ruthless, cursed, and unyielding. Few dared enter his world, and even fewer returned unchanged. That night the mansion's massive doors opened not for a criminal, but for a trembling young woman named Isolde. She was unlike anyone Lucien had ever seen, soft in body, yet with a light in her eyes that refused to bow. Her father had delivered her here as a punishment, presenting his daughter like a piece of property to the feared boss. Isolde's heart pounded against her ribs as she stepped inside. The halls were cold, adorned with dark tapestries that seemed to watch her every movement. Servants and guards moved silently, their eyes sharp and questioning. She felt small, invisible, and yet at the same time painfully exposed. Her father's words still echoed in her ears. "You have disappointed me. Perhaps he will teach you obedience or at least humility." And now here she was, at the mercy of the man who ruled this city with iron hands and whispered legends. Lucian's study was a cathedral of shadows. Books lined the walls in perfect, oppressive order, and a fireplace burned with a pale, unsteady flame. He sat behind an enormous desk, his eyes like storm clouds, gray and unreadable. When he looked at her, Isolde felt the weight of his gaze pressing into her skin. "You are my father's gift." His voice was low, almost musical, yet sharp as broken glass. "Yes, sir," she whispered, bowing her head. She felt every inch the failure her father said she was. Lucien leaned back, studying her with an intensity that made her want to shrink into herself. "And what makes you think you belong here?" he asked, not with anger but with something colder, something that felt like curiosity or perhaps amusement. Isolde lifted her chin. She had little choice, but she could choose dignity. I do not belong here." "But I will do what I must," she said softly. Something flickered in Lucian's eyes, interest perhaps, though he quickly masked it. Most would have cowered or stumbled under his gaze, but she did not. That small act of courage did not escape him. "Very well," he said finally. "You will stay, you will obey the rules of this house. You will speak only when spoken to, and you will never, ever forget who holds power here." Isolde nodded. Her throat felt dry, but she forced herself to speak with steady words. "I understand, sir." That night she was shown to her room, a lavish chamber that felt more like a cell than a sanctuary. Silk curtains hung heavy and dark, shadows pooling in the corners. She could hear the distant sound of footsteps and muffled voices in the mansion's vast halls. Outside, the wind moaned through the city, carrying with it the scent of rain and secrets. Alone, Isolde allowed herself a moment of quiet despair. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She had survived her father's cruelty, and she would survive this too. The next morning, Lucien summoned her to the great hall. The sun was weak, barely cutting through the clouds, but the hall was alive with servants, advisors, and guards. All eyes turned to the young woman who had been delivered to the boss. Whispers filled the air like a swarm of shadows. Lucien entered silently, as though the world bent to his presence. Every step echoed against the stone floor. When he reached her, he stopped, his stormy eyes fixed on her face. "You will join me for lessons," he said simply. "Not lessons of reading or writing. Lessons of life, of power, of survival. You must learn what it means to exist in a world that will not forgive weakness." Isolde's heart sank. She was untrained, unprepared, and unworthy in her father's eyes, but perhaps not in his. Something about the weight in his gaze suggested that he did not see her as merely a failure. Yet fear still gripped her. She was stepping into a world that demanded perfection, and she was flawed. The first lesson was in the mansion's vast library, where Lucien taught not with patience, but with precision. He spoke of alliances, of betrayals, of the subtle language of power that no outsider could ever hope to understand. Isolde listened, struggling to keep pace, yet she was not ignorant. She asked questions, simple ones at first, but each question was a spark in the dim air, drawing Lucian's attention in ways he did not expect. "You are persistent," he noted one evening, leaning against the carved desk. "Most people stop asking when they sense danger. You do not." "I want to understand," she said simply. "I cannot change what my father has done, but I can learn how to survive here." Lucian's gaze lingered on her. Most would have been crushed by fear, but she did not tremble. There was a strange, unspoken power in her steadiness, and he could not decide if it annoyed him or intrigued him. Days passed. Isolde adjusted to the mansion, learning its rules, its dangers, and its rhythms. She moved quietly, avoided unnecessary attention, yet she began to notice small cracks in Lucian's armor. There were moments when he lingered too long on a book, or when he stared out a window as if seeing something only he could perceive. She saw fleeting shadows of grief, of loneliness, of regret. And then, one night, everything changed. A storm struck the city. Rain battered the mansion's windows like 1,000 drummers, wind rattling the shutters. Isolde could not sleep, and something compelled her to walk through the darkened halls. She wandered toward the study, drawn by the faint glow of candlelight. Inside, Lucian was alone, standing by the fireplace. His posture was rigid, yet there was a tension in the air that made her pause. "You shouldn't be here," he said without turning. "I could not sleep," she admitted. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "The storm, it makes the house feel smaller, more alive." He turned, and for a moment she caught a glimpse of a man burdened with unseen chains. His eyes softened, though only for an instant. "Curiosity will get you killed in this world," he said. Isolde stepped closer, her courage outweighing her fear. "Perhaps," she said, "but I would rather face the danger than hide forever." For a heartbeat, silence hung between them, heavy and charged. Lucian, who was used to commanding fear and obedience, found himself caught off guard. Few ever spoke to him like that. Few ever dared to stand so close without trembling. "Most people are weak," he said finally, his voice low, almost a growl. "Most people crumble at the first sign of truth. You do not. Why is that?" Isolde met his gaze. "Because I have already been crushed once," she said softly, "and I survived. Perhaps I am stronger than I look." Lucian's expression did not change, but inside something shifted. Here was a girl, given to him as a punishment, and yet she met his storm with a quiet courage that he could not ignore. He studied her in silence, the firelight reflecting in his eyes like liquid steel. "You are not like the others," he said at last. "Do not think for a moment that you are safe here. You are not, but there is something about you that I cannot understand." Isolde's pulse quickened. Fear and fascination twisted together inside her chest. She was still at his mercy, still trapped in a world she had not chosen, yet she felt, strangely, alive. As the storm raged outside, the mansion seemed to close around them, isolating the two of them in its dark heart. In that moment, a fragile connection formed, delicate yet undeniable, between the Mafia boss and the girl who had been delivered to him as punishment. Lucian finally spoke, his voice softer than before, yet laced with unspoken warning. "You will survive, perhaps. But do not mistake my curiosity for kindness. The world is cruel, and I am not a savior." "I do not seek salvation," Isolde said quietly. "Only a chance to stand, to endure, and perhaps to be seen for who I truly am." A flicker of something like respect crossed his eyes. And for the first time, Isolde sensed that she had a place here, not a place of comfort, but a place of possibility. But the night was far from over. Outside, the storm's fury mirrored the tension in the mansion, as if the world itself had taken note of the fragile alliance forming in the shadows. And Lucian, who had never been vulnerable to anyone, felt a strange, unbidden thought. What if she survives not just the storm, but me? And in that quiet, candle-lit room, as thunder rolled across the sky, both of them understood something unspoken. Their fates were now bound together, in ways neither of them could yet comprehend. And the storm outside promised that the calm would be only temporary. Cliffhanger. In that instant, fear and fascination collided, leaving both of them on the edge of a dangerous, invisible precipice. The morning after the storm, the mansion seemed both alive and hollow. Sunlight tried to pierce the heavy curtains, but shadows lingered stubbornly in the corners. Isolde walked carefully through the halls, her footsteps echoing on the cold stone floors. Every glance at the towering walls reminded her that she was in a world not made for the gentle, yet she had survived the night. Lucian was waiting in the great hall as always. His presence filled the room like a dark tide, and even the guards instinctively straightened when he entered. Today, however, his eyes lingered longer on her than usual. "Walk with me," he commanded, his voice soft, yet carrying the weight of authority that brooked no refusal. Isolde's heart fluttered. Walking beside Lucian was like moving through the eye of a storm. Outside, the courtyard was wet and glistening from last night's rain. The wind had calmed, but the air still carried the scent of wet earth and smoke from the city beyond. "Why do you watch me so closely?" she asked, breaking the silence, her curiosity outweighing her fear. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked beside her, the sound of his boots sharp against the stone. Finally, he spoke. "Because most people are weak. Most people bow, beg, or run. You do none of these, you endure." "I have endured my father," Isolde replied softly. "I have endured the world. I am learning that endurance is all I have." Lucian's jaw tightened. There was something in her words that stirred something long buried within him, a memory, a regret, or perhaps the echo of a pain he thought he had buried forever. He turned to face her, his gray eyes intense. "Endurance is not enough here," he said. "You must understand power, survival, and trust. And yet," he paused, searching her face, "there is a strength in you that makes me wonder if endurance is only the beginning." Isolde felt a shiver run through her. She had come to accept fear as a companion, but there was something about Lucian's attention that felt like both threat and promise. For the next few days, Lucian began teaching her in earnest. Lessons were not of books or numbers, but of life in a world governed by shadows. He taught her to read people, to notice subtle shifts in tone and posture, to understand danger even when it was invisible. Isolde struggled at first, her heart racing with anxiety, but she was not stupid. She listened, remembered, and adapted. Slowly, she began to see the patterns in Lucian's methods, the hidden lessons behind every sharp word and calculated gesture. One evening, he summoned her to the library again. Rain had returned, a gentle drizzle tapping at the windows like distant fingers. The room smelled of old paper, candle wax, and the faint smoke from the hearth. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a chair across from him. She obeyed, sitting carefully, hands folded in her lap. Lucian leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Tell me, Isolde," he said, his voice low, "what do you know of curses?" Isolde blinked. "Curses? Yes, there are stories old and powerful that cling to families like shadows. They twist fate, claim lives, and demand vigilance." His gaze sharpened. "My family carries one." She swallowed. "What kind of curse?" Lucian's expression darkened, a shadow passing over his face. "One that has taken more than it should. Those who love me too closely suffer. Sometimes they vanish, sometimes worse." Isolde's pulse quickened. Fear mingled with fascination. She had never believed fully in ghosts or curses, yet the way he spoke, so calm yet so certain, made her question her own understanding of reality. "Then why do you let me stay?" she asked quietly, her voice barely audible above the rain. He studied her, eyes flickering with a storm of emotions. "Because you are not afraid of the truth. You see the world as it is, and yet you endure. That is rare." For the first time, Isolde saw a crack in his otherwise impenetrable demeanor. Behind the cold exterior there was grief, caution, and perhaps a longing he did not dare to admit. Days passed, and the mansion itself seemed to watch her. Shadows moved strangely in the corners, whispers of wind carrying murmurs she could not place. Servants whispered of the curse, of the dangers that clung to the boss. Even the guards avoided speaking directly about it. And yet, Isolde felt a strange draw to the mansion's dark heart, as though it wanted her to see the truth behind its walls. One afternoon, a masked visitor arrived at the gates, a courier bearing urgent news. Lucian read the message and frowned, his usual calm replaced by a flicker of unease. "Trouble is coming," he said, turning to Isolde. "You must learn to move not as a guest but as one who belongs here. Are you ready for that?" Isolde nodded, her throat tight. She did not fully understand what he meant, but she trusted him enough to follow. Over the next weeks, Lucian tested her in subtle ways. He observed how she handled fear, how she reacted under pressure, and how she navigated the web of power within the mansion. Most would have crumbled, yet Isolde's quiet resilience drew his attention more than he wanted to admit. There were moments, brief and fleeting, when Lucian's mask slipped. A glance lingered too long, a hand brushed hers accidentally, a word softened in tone. Each time she felt a dangerous mixture of fear and fascination. Then came the night that changed everything. A rival gang, seeking to challenge Lucian's power, attempted an assault on the mansion. Isolde had been warned to stay inside, away from danger, but when she heard the first sounds of chaos, the shouts, the clash of steel, she could not remain idle. She found herself running toward the great hall, where Lucian confronted the intruders with the precision of a storm. Shadows of danger moved through the corridors, and a masked figure lunged toward him. Without thinking, Isolde intervened, grabbing a heavy candlestick and striking the assailant just in time. Lucian's eyes widened in surprise, then hardened with a mixture of respect and concern. She had risked herself, defying his silent rules, yet her courage was undeniable. "Step back," he shouted, his voice like thunder, as he dispatched the remaining attackers with calculated force. Isolde stood trembling, heart racing, yet unhurt. Lucian approached, his eyes scanning her for injuries, and then he did something he had not done with anyone in years. He touched her arm, steadying her, grounding her in the chaos. "You are reckless," he said, voice low, yet carrying something unreadable beneath the words. "I could not let them," she began, but he cut her off. "You could have died," he said, eyes locking with hers. "Do you understand what you have done? You are not just brave, you are dangerous. And I cannot decide if I am angry or grateful." Isolde's breath caught. The tension between them was electric, unspoken, dangerous. For a moment the world seemed to shrink to the space between them, the rain outside fading to a distant hum. "You saved me," he admitted finally, his voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. "I saved you because I had to," she said, heart pounding. "Not because I wanted your thanks." Lucian studied her, searching her eyes as if seeking something he had long forgotten. "Most people would not survive this night. You have done more than endure. You have changed something inside me. I do not yet understand what, but I feel it, and it terrifies me." Isolde's pulse raced. She had not intended to provoke such an admission, yet she felt a strange warmth at his words, as though their fates were intertwining in ways neither fully controlled. The storm outside continued, lightning illuminating the grand hall in sudden bursts, casting jagged shadows across the walls. The mansion, once merely a place of fear, seemed alive with possibility, danger, and unspoken promise. Lucian finally spoke, stepping closer. "You are not like the others, Isolde. You stand where others fall, you speak where others stay silent, and yet I fear what this will bring for both of us." "I am not afraid," she said softly. "I have survived my father. I can survive this." For a heartbeat, they regarded each other in silence, the storm echoing the tension between them. And then, the shadows in the corners of the hall seemed to deepen, as if aware that their fragile bond was forming in the eye of a gathering tempest. Cliffhanger. As lightning struck outside, illuminating her determined face, Isolde realized that she was no longer merely a punishment sent to the Mafia boss. She was part of a dangerous, shifting game, one that could change both their lives forever. The mansion was quiet in the early morning, but the silence felt heavy, almost alive. Sunlight tried to filter through the tall, narrow windows, but it could not reach the shadows that lingered in the corners. Isolde moved through the halls with careful steps, her mind still racing from the events of the previous night. The attack had been sudden, violent, and terrifying, but she had survived, and more than that, she had acted. For the first time, she realized that she was not merely a pawn in her father's cruel game. She had a role to play here, a chance to be something more than what others expected of her. Lucian, however, did not seem fully at ease. He had spent the entire morning inspecting the mansion, talking in hushed tones to his guards and advisors. When he finally saw her, his eyes flickered with a mixture of concern and something deeper, harder to read. "Walk with me," he said, voice low but commanding. Isolde followed. The halls were cold, but the courtyard offered a faint warmth from the rising sun. The fountain at the center glistened with rainwater from the storm, its surface reflecting the mansion's dark towers. Lucian's eyes never left her, and she felt that same mixture of fear and fascination that had been growing inside her since the day she arrived. "You acted recklessly," he said, breaking the silence. "You could have been killed. Do you understand that?" "I understand," she replied, steady and calm. "But I could not stand by, I could not do nothing." Lucian studied her as though trying to read her thoughts, her intentions, her very soul. "Most people would have obeyed," he said finally. "Most people would have hidden behind fear. You did not. That is dangerous." Isolde felt a shiver run through her. His words were both a warning and something more. A recognition of her courage, yes, but also a hint that she had begun to awaken something in him that he had long tried to bury. In the following days, the mansion became a place of lessons and tests. Lucian pushed her subtly, in ways that challenged both her mind and her heart. He taught her to read the faces of those around her, to notice the slightest shifts in tone, posture, or expression. He taught her that power was not only in strength, but in subtlety, patience, and observation. Isolde struggled at first, but she was intelligent and willing to learn. Slowly she began to anticipate his lessons, noticing patterns in the way he observed the world, the way he reacted to danger, the way he expected loyalty without asking for it. One evening, Lucian led her to the mansion's garden. The storm had left puddles on the cobblestones, and the scent of wet earth mingled with the faint fragrance of roses that bloomed stubbornly in the dark soil. The air was heavy with moisture, and the sky above was a soft gray, the clouds lingering like shadows caught in motion. "Tell me," Lucian said, his voice unusually soft, "what do you feel when you are here?" Isolde hesitated. She had not expected this question. I feel afraid," she admitted honestly, "but also curious. There is a world here I did not know, and I want to understand it. I want to survive it, and maybe even be a part of it." Lucian's gaze lingered on her longer than usual. There was something in her words, something rare, that made him pause. Most people would have simply obeyed, or recoiled, or pretended to understand. But she had spoken truthfully, openly, without fear of judgment. "You are not like the others," he said quietly, "and that is why I am fascinated, and also wary." Isolde's heart quickened. Fascination was one thing, but wariness hinted at something deeper, something she could not yet name. She knew the mansion had a pulse, a life of its own, and now she could see that the man at its center did too. Over the following weeks, their connection deepened in subtle ways. Lucian began to share pieces of himself, stories of his past, of betrayals that had haunted him, of losses he could never forget. Isolde listened, careful and respectful, but with a quiet empathy that surprised even her. "I lost someone I loved," Lucian confessed one night, his eyes dark in the candlelight. Someone I trusted with my life, and yet I failed. I could not protect her and she vanished. Isolde felt a pang in her chest. I am sorry, she said softly. It is not your fault. You cannot control everything, no matter how powerful you are. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment his guard slipped. Most people say that to make themselves feel better, but you mean it. The truth of her words seemed to reach something inside him he had long thought dead. A faint, flickering hope, buried beneath grief, began to stir. Their growing bond, however, was not without danger. The whispers of the curse continued to echo through the mansion. Shadows seemed to move where no one walked, and servants spoke in hushed tones of misfortune that might follow those who drew too close to the boss. One evening, while Isolde wandered the library, she noticed a book left open on a desk. It spoke of ancient family curses, of love and loss intertwined, of spirits that clung to those who defied fate. She read carefully, heart pounding, realizing that Lucian's warnings were not just words, they were truths shaped by centuries of tragedy. When Lucian entered the room, he found her reading the book. He did not look angry, instead his expression was thoughtful, almost sad. You seek knowledge that is dangerous, he said quietly. And yet, I cannot stop you. Perhaps you are braver than I am. Isolde closed the book, meeting his gaze. I do not seek danger, she said softly. I seek understanding. If there is a curse, I want to know it and perhaps help you break it. He studied her for a long moment, the candlelight casting shadows across his face. You are reckless, he said finally, and yet I cannot deny that your courage is remarkable. Most would turn away. You do not. Then, one night, the danger became immediate. A shadow moved outside the mansion's walls, a figure masked and silent, approaching the garden where Isolde had wandered. Lucian, ever vigilant, intercepted the intruder before harm could come to her. But this time, she did not step back. I can help, she said, her voice steady. I know how to distract them, to lead them away if needed. He hesitated, then nodded. Together, they outmaneuvered the intruder, working as a silent, unspoken team. Lucian watched her closely, amazed at her intuition, her courage, her unshakable focus. After the intruder fled, Lucian turned to her. You are not a pawn, he said quietly. You are something more. I do not yet know what, but I see it. Isolde's chest tightened. She had never expected recognition from him, nor acknowledgement of her strength. Yet in his words, there was a hint of something forbidden, something dangerous, the beginnings of trust, of connection, of something deeper than fear. In the days that followed, their moments together became charged with unspoken emotion. A glance lingered too long, a hand brushed hers accidentally, a conversation held in candlelight stretched beyond the mundane into something intimate and fragile. Neither spoke openly, yet both felt the pull between them, a magnetic tension neither could ignore. And then, one evening in the quiet of the mansion's garden, Lucian spoke words he had never said aloud before. If you leave me, the curse may take all that I have left, he said, voice low, trembling slightly. And if I hold you close, I fear it will take you. Isolde felt a chill, the weight of his fear settling over her like a dark cloud. She understood, finally, that the danger surrounding Lucian was not just about enemies, but about something far older, far darker, a curse that threatened anyone who dared to come close. I will not leave you, she said softly, reaching out. I have already faced more than I should. I am not afraid of this. He looked at her, eyes wide, heart heavy with a fear he could not fully name. The wind stirred the leaves, the mansion seemed to hold its breath, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. You are reckless, he whispered, almost to himself. And yet I cannot turn away. I cannot ignore what you have become to me. Isolde's pulse raced. She had survived her father, survived the city, survived the first threats of the mansion. But now, standing with Lucian in the garden, she realized that she was in the eye of a storm far greater than she had imagined, a storm of danger, desire, and fate itself. The shadows around them deepened, the whispers of the curse growing louder, and the mansion seemed to pulse with life. Lucian's hand hovered near hers, a silent question, a fragile offering. And Isolde, her courage burning brighter than ever, did the unthinkable. She stepped closer. For a heartbeat, the world held still. The storm of past and future, danger and hope, desire and fear, all collided in that quiet, fragile moment. And in that collision, something unspoken, forbidden, yet undeniable began to take root, a bond that could change both their fates forever. Cliffhanger. Lucian's eyes narrowed, his body tense, and he whispered to Isolde, "The curse, it knows you are here, and it will not forgive." Isolde's heart raced. She understood now. Surviving the mansion was no longer enough. To survive with Lucian, to protect him and herself, they would have to face the darkness together. The mansion was alive with tension as dusk settled over the city. Shadows stretched long across the marble floors, and candlelight flickered in the tall windows, casting delicate patterns on the walls. Outside, the wind whispered like a secret, carrying the distant murmur of the city below, but inside, a more pressing danger stirred, one that had followed Lucian for years, now fully aware of Isolde's presence. Lucian paced the great hall, his hands clenched into fists. The curse that had haunted his family for generations was no longer a distant shadow. It was near, tangible, and threatening. Every whispered rumor, every shadowy movement, every subtle shift in the mansion's atmosphere now carried weight. And he could feel it in the pit of his stomach. If he did not act, the cost would be catastrophic. Isolde entered quietly, sensing his unease before he spoke. "Lucian," she said softly, "we will face this together. You do not have to carry it alone." He stopped, turning toward her. For a moment his usual stern mask faltered, revealing the vulnerability he had hidden for so long. "I cannot protect you," he admitted, voice low, almost pained. "This curse, it takes those closest to me. Even a moment's closeness could put you in danger." "I am not afraid," she said, stepping closer. "I chose to be here. I will face whatever comes with you." Lucian's eyes softened, a flicker of hope mingling with the fear he could not fully suppress. He had been alone for so long, haunted by loss and betrayal, yet here was someone who did not flinch at the shadows. She was not just brave, she was steadfast, and that steadiness was more powerful than any weapon or strategy he had ever known. Together, they began to search for a way to confront the curse. Old journals and hidden letters revealed fragments of truth. The curse was not merely a punishment, it was a binding force, created long ago to protect the Valcourt family from betrayal. But it had twisted over the centuries, taking loved ones instead of enemies, feeding on grief and demanding fear. "It can be broken," Isolde said one evening, tracing the delicate patterns in an ancient manuscript. "Not by magic alone, but by trust, by courage, by love. We can end this if we face it together." Lucian studied her, the weight of years pressing down on his shoulders. "You would risk everything for me?" he asked quietly. "Even knowing the danger?" "I already have," she said softly, eyes meeting his. "And I would risk more." "You are no longer alone, Lucian. You have me." That night the mansion itself seemed to react. The shadows deepened, stretching unnaturally across floors and walls. The wind whispered in voices that carried warnings and threats. Isolde and Lucian moved through the corridors, side by side, each step deliberate, each movement measured. They were no longer teacher and pupil, or boss and pawn. They were partners, bound by choice, courage, and a growing, undeniable connection. As they approached the heart of the mansion, the air grew thick with tension. A chill swept through the hallways, and the shadows writhed as though alive. Lucian stopped, placing a hand on the door that led to the oldest part of the estate. "This is where it began," he said. "Where my ancestors bound the curse, and where it may end." Isolde nodded, gripping his hand. Together they stepped inside. The room was vast, lined with faded tapestries and dust-covered relics. In the center lay a carved stone altar, etched with symbols older than Lucian could name. Shadows clung to the corners, twisting and shifting as if aware of their intrusion. Lucian took a deep breath. "The curse will try to protect itself," he warned. "It will test our courage, our trust, and our bond. If we falter, it may take one of us, perhaps both." Isolde stepped closer. "Then we do not falter," she said firmly. "We face it together. No matter what it wants, no matter how it strikes, we are stronger together." A sudden gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles. Shadows surged forward, dark and twisting, and a low, resonant whisper filled the air. Lucian's hand tightened around hers, anchoring them both. "Fear it," the shadows seemed to hiss, "and you will fail." Lucian and Isolde closed their eyes, drawing strength not from the fear around them, but from the connection between them. They spoke aloud, in unison, repeating the words that Isolde had found in the ancient manuscripts. "By trust and courage, by bond unbroken, we challenge the curse. It has no power over hearts united. It shall not take what we choose to protect." For a moment, nothing happened. The shadows swirled, hesitant as though testing them. Then, with a violent shudder, the room erupted in light. Symbols on the altar glowed faintly, and the wind carried a soft, mournful sigh, as if the curse itself were acknowledging defeat. Lucian opened his eyes, breathing heavily, and looked at Isolde. Her face was illuminated by the glow, eyes steady, heart unwavering. Together, they had done what many thought impossible. They had faced the darkness together, and they had endured. The shadows slowly receded, the air lightened, and a calm fell over the room that felt almost sacred. Lucian sank to one knee, staring at Isolde with a mixture of relief, awe, and something deeper, something he had never allowed himself to feel before. You saved more than me," he said quietly. "You saved us. You saved me from a lifetime of fear and solitude." Isolde knelt beside him, taking his hand. "We saved each other," she said softly. "The curse is gone, but what we found here together is stronger than anything it could ever take." For the first time in years, Lucian allowed himself to smile, not the cold, guarded expression of a man used to command, but a smile of genuine relief and warmth. He reached out, gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "You are not a punishment," he said, voice low, reverent. "You are the most extraordinary part of this life I have ever known, and I am changed because of you." Tears pricked at Isolde's eyes, not of sorrow, but of joy and release. She had endured so much: her father's cruelty, the uncertainty of the mansion, the threat of the curse. But now, at last, she understood her true worth. She was no longer a pawn, no longer a gift to be discarded. She was a partner, equal in courage and spirit, shaping the future alongside the man who had once seemed untouchable. The mansion itself seemed to shift with their newfound bond. The halls no longer felt oppressive, the shadows no longer threatening. The wind carried whispers, but now they were gentle, almost approving, as if the estate itself recognized the transformation. Days passed, and life slowly returned to a delicate normalcy. Lucian and Isolde moved through the mansion side by side, their relationship no longer defined by fear or obligation, but by mutual respect, trust, and an unspoken, deepening love. The guards and servants noticed the change. The way the mansion seemed lighter, warmer, as though the darkness had been lifted by their courage and unity. Lucian, once distant and haunted, began to show sides of himself that no one had seen in years. Moments of quiet reflection, rare laughter, and a willingness to share the burdens he had carried alone for so long. And Isolde, once timid and unsure, had grown into a figure of quiet strength and confidence, respected not for obedience, but for her heart and intelligence. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Lucian led Isolde to the balcony overlooking the city. The wind carried the scent of rain-soaked streets and distant flowers. They stood together, hands intertwined, gazing at the horizon. "You have changed me in ways I cannot fully describe," Lucian said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. I feared loneliness, betrayal, and the curse, but now I fear nothing because I have you. Isolde smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. And I have you, she replied. No matter what the world brings, we face it together. That is our strength. For a long moment they simply stood, watching the city below. Shadows from the past lingered, but they no longer held power over them. The curse had been broken, danger had been faced, and love, patient, enduring, and transformative, had taken root. Lucian turned to Isolde, eyes bright with unspoken promise. Whatever comes next, he said, voice steady, we face it together. Nothing can take that from us. And as the first stars appeared in the evening sky, they understood something profound. The mansion, once a place of fear and shadows, was now a home, a sanctuary, a place where courage, trust, and love had triumphed over darkness. Together they had not only survived, they had transformed. The world beyond the walls would always be unpredictable, filled with dangers and whispers of the past. But within the walls of the mansion, with hearts united and courage shared, they were no longer victims of fate. They were the authors of their own destiny. And so, as the city settled under a blanket of night, Lucian and Isolde stood together, hands entwined, hearts beating in unison, ready to face whatever the future might bring, with shadows behind them and hope ahead.